rosters of kind of recent memory that should have probably won more than they did. So this week we're going to talk about the 2018 Arizona Diamondbacks. They finished 82 and 80. They were third in the NL West behind the Dodgers and the Rockies. If you remember, that was the season that the Dodgers and the Rockies actually had to play an extra game, I believe, to see who would win the division. Obviously, it ended up being the Dodgers. But a lot of people forget the Rockies were actually that close. But yeah, the year before, obviously in 2017, the Rockies hosted the wild card game against the Rockies, and they ended up winning, and then they lost to the Dodgers in the NLDS. And obviously they were in second place because they hosted the game. So they kind of dropped off a little bit in 2018. And man, their roster didn't change a ton. They had Ketel Marte playing second base in 2018. This was kind of before he broke out and became like who we know now of Ketel Marte. But yeah, so this year he had a 768 OPS, 14 home runs. He hit leadoff pretty much every game, I believe, unless he was not playing. Played 153 games, so he played almost the whole year. Then you had AJ Pollock in center field. That's when he was still with the D-backs. That year, he had an 800 OPS, 21 homers. He played in 113 games, and he had 13 stolen bases. So got hurt a little bit, but he pretty much gets hurt every single season. No offense to him, but you need to stay healthy to put up better numbers. So he obviously has done great with the Dodgers so far. Then you move on to David Peralta. This was probably Peralta's best season ever. He hit 293, 30 homers, 87 RBIs, 868 OPS, played in 140-ish games, so missed about 20 games or so, but pretty solid season. Then you had Paul Goldschmidt. Paul Goldschmidt, 158 games, of course, because he's barely ever injured. 290, 33 homers, 83 RBIs. You would have thought the RBIs would have been a little bit higher for Goldschmidt. That was kind of interesting to me, but he had a 922 OPS, so he had a great season. Then you had Jake Lamb started the season as the everyday third baseman, but then at the trade deadline, this was actually the year that they traded for Eduardo Escobar. And so I think Escobar kind of took over Lamb's role because Lamb was kind of struggling. So I combined both of their numbers this year for this season. So they both played in a total of 110 games for the Diamondbacks. I'm not counting Escobar's stats with the Twins that year. 245, 14 homers, 719 OPS. Obviously, the numbers kind of bounced up when Escobar went over there compared to Lamb, but not terrible. Then you had Nick Ahmed. This is probably Ahmed's best season too. This season he played 153 games. He hit 16 homers, 70 RBIs. So pretty solid RBI season for him. His OPS was only 700, but he just kept driving in runs. So pretty solid season from him. Then you had Steven Souza, who missed a ton of time this season. He only played in 72 games. He was playing right field most of the time. Only had 5 homers, a 678 OPS, so not great there. Then the catcher who played the most games for them this season was John Ryan Murphy. He played in 87 games. He had 9 home runs and a 619 OPS. So those two guys, not really great stats. But otherwise, man, the lineup was pretty solid. I think Peralta had his monster season out of nowhere. If the top 4, let's say 5, if you count Escobar when he came over in the lineup, was really solid. Then you had a shortstop who's not usually a pretty good hitter, and he drove in 70 runs. So I would say the top 6 guys really did their job in the lineup this season. Their offense was not the problem. I don't remember if this was when the ball was still flying out of the ballpark in Arizona before they added the humidifier thing. I believe so, because Peralta never really put up numbers like that ever. So, yeah, I mean, the offense was clearly not the issue for them. Then you had the pitching rotation, which really was awesome. This was way better than I remember it. So they had Zach Greinke at the top. He had a 3.21 ERA. He had 199 strikeouts this season. Then you had Patrick Corbin, who had a 3.15 ERA. This was kind of the year he broke out before he ended up going to the Nationals. So he had a 3.15 ERA, 246 strikeouts. He had 11 strikeouts per 9. It's a pretty high number for him. Then you had this year's Cy Young winner, Robbie Ray. Pitched in 24 games, so he missed probably 10 starts this season. But he had a 3.93 ERA, so not terrible. He had 165 strikeouts, 12 strikeouts per nine. Then you had a guy, Clay Buckholz, who I actually forgot played for the Diamondbacks. This season, he had 16 starts, so he was hurt for a little bit too. But when he was on the field, he had a 2.01 ERA, which is astronomically low for a guy like that at his age when he was kind of declining. He had a great season. He had a 1.037 whip. That was the lowest on the entire staff in Arizona. So was the ERA. So those top four guys were really solid. Then you had Zach Godley, who had a 4.74 ERA, but he had 9 strikeouts per nine, 185 strikeouts. So his ERA was kind of ballooned up there. But still, if you have 4 guys in your rotation whose ERAs are below 4, and then your 5th guy's ERA is below 5, that's a recipe for success, in my opinion. I don't really understand how they only won 82 games with a rotation like this and an offense like they had. Because honestly, their bullpen was not an issue either. They had Brad Boxberger, who had 32 saves. His ERA was above 4, but he did have 32 saves, so he didn't blow that many games. And he had 12 strikeouts per nine, which I believe was a career high for him. Then you had TJ McFarland, who I believe signed with the Cardinals before the lockout ended. He had a 2 ERA that season. So he was really solid for them too. Then you had Archie Bradley, obviously was really good for them. He had a 3.64 ERA. He also had 3 saves. Then you had Yoshi Hirano, who had come over from Japan, I believe in 2017, maybe it was 2018 though. He had a 2.44 ERA, and then you had Andrew Chafin, who kind of moved around a lot this year, was at the Cubs and the A's, and he had a 3.10 ERA this season. So the bullpen, obviously not an issue either. They had guys who most of them had ERAs below 4, some had ERAs below 3. TJ McFarland almost had an ERA below 2. So those top bullpen guys really weren't problems either. And then if you look at their bench, they had Daniel Descalso played the most games from the bench, 138 games. So he was kind of just filling in for guys left and right. He had 13 homers, 57 RBIs, and a 789 OPS. From your top bench guy, who's a utility guy, he played all the infield positions, I believe, and all the outfield positions that season. I don't know. That's exactly what you want. Solid numbers, pop once in a while, drove in runs, and he had an OPS close to 800. It kind of declines a little bit on the bench after this. You had John Jay, who kind of filled in defensively a lot. He only had 2 homers, 629 OPS, not great. Chris Owings was kind of the other backup infielder, 4 homers. He had 11 stolen bases. Gerard Dyson was actually on this team too, which I didn't remember either. And he had 16 stolen bases. Not really much else to talk about on offense. Obviously, he was more of a defensive speed guy. Then you had Alex Avila, was primarily the backup catcher there. He only hit 165, but he had 7 homers and he had 20 RBIs. So he didn't play a ton. But the 165 batting average was kind of strange when you look at the 7 homers. But man, to me though, when I look at this team, I just don't see why they only won 82 games. There's a lot of teams, obviously, there's always teams like that. Whether it's the Phillies, we look at the Phillies every season, like, man, they have a good roster. I don't understand why they're always right around 500. This season, again, obviously the Dodgers and the Rockies were both really good teams, powerhouses. They both had great starting rotations, great offenses. But from the stats I just gave you, so did the Diamondbacks. I guess this could have had maybe something to do with just losing to the teams ahead of them, close games or something, because, from their offense to their starting rotation, that was probably one of the best in the league that year. Their bullpen was really good. And they had just come off a playoff season. So it's not like they were changing the roster a lot. Most of these guys on the roster were on the team the year before. So it was very interesting to me that the Diamondbacks didn't make it farther than they did. 82-80, right around 500. You're always just going to wonder what if they had played better, they might have been in a 3-way tie with the Dodgers and the Rockies for the division. You never know, but obviously the Diamondbacks are in a little bit of a rebuild right now, but they should probably be back in the playoffs within the next 5 years or so. So we'll look for that to change around down in the desert.